Hello and welcome to my Yu-Gi-Oh channel. Today we're going to be looking at the reprint cards that are coming out with the brand new The Agent Structure deck. Archlord Christia is a light attribute fairy type level 8 with 2800 attack and 2300 defense. The effect: if you have exactly 4 fairy type monsters in your graveyard, you can special summon this card from your hand. If summoned this way, target one fairy type monster in your graveyard, add that target to your hand. Neither player can special summon monsters. If this face up card would be sent from the field to the graveyard, place it on top of the deck instead. The whole point of this card is it's meant to lock your opponent out of special summoning. Yes, it does the same for you, but since this is a 2800 attack monster and it can just be instantly special summoned, it prevents your opponent from really doing anything to it. It's a decent effect and it does recover itself as well, even though it does go to the top of your deck, which does damage your new draw. It's a decent reprint for what the deck needs. Herald of Orange Light is a light attribute fairy type tuner monster, level 2 with 300 attack and 500 defense. And the effect is when your opponent activates a monster effect as a quick effect, you can send this card and one other fairy type monster from your hand to the graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. You have a purple light and a green light as well. One is for trap cards negations and one is for spell card negations. It's a decent enough effect and it's nice that it's been introduced as a reprint, but it does cost 2 cards to negate one, so you're always minusing yourself. Eva is a light attribute fairy type level 1 with 500 attack and 200 defense. Its effect is, if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can banish up to 2 other light fairy monsters from your field and or graveyard, add the same number of level 2 or lower light monsters with different names from your deck to your hand, except Eva. You can only use this effect of Eva once per turn. The benefit of this card is it does help you search for some of your weaker level monsters, so you've got the Herald of Orange Light and Purple Light and Green Light. Those are all level 2 monsters, so you can add some consistency, and there are cards that actually work alongside being banished within the light attributes and the fairy types, and there are support cards that work alongside that as well. I'm sure there's spell and traps that can revive. The Sanctum of Parshaft is a continuous spell card with the effect: this card's name becomes the sanctuary in the sky while on the field or in the graveyard. Fairy monsters on the field gain 300 attack and defense. Set spell or trap cards cannot be targeted by or destroyed by card effects. Once per turn, you can target a total of 3 fairy type monsters and or counter traps with different names in your graveyard. Place them on top of your deck in any order. The purpose of this card is, firstly, it acts as the sanctuary in the sky, which helps to activate the effects and the additional ones of your counter fairy monsters, and this acts both whilst it's on the field and the graveyard. It provides your fairy type monsters with a little boost by 300 attack and defense. It provides your spell and traps with protection from being destroyed by other card effects, so that means unless you're activating those effects yourself, those cards are safe until they get rid of this card first. And it also provides you with some graveyard recovery whilst it is consistent. Those cards do go to the top of your deck in any order you desire. The benefit is you are recovering those cards. The downside is your opponent knows roughly what you're bringing back, which means they know how to avoid this strategy. It would have been nicer if that had just been able to recover those cards and then be able to shuffle those cards into the deck at any point, hoping to draw into fresh cards, because otherwise you're just top decking in a situation where your opponent might get wise to what you're doing. Creature Swap is a normal spell card with the effect: each player chooses one monster they control and switch control of these with each other. Those monsters cannot change their battle positions for the rest of this turn. The benefit of this card is it does provide you with access to one of your opponent's monsters if you've got weak monsters on your field. The problem is that it's your opponent that chooses for you what you receive, so until you get rid of some of their weakest monsters and then leave them with only one card, which stops them from having an option, it's not that viable a card. It's nice as a reprint, but it's a very slow strategy to rely on. Divine Punishment is a counter trap card with the effect: when a spell or trap card or monster effect is activated while the sanctuary in the sky is on the field, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. This is a decent effect because you're going to be having Sanctuary in the Sky most of the time. If not, you've got other variations that name themselves as such. That means whenever your opponent tries to do anything, you can stop them and destroy that card, and that means they're not able to recover that or to use its effect. If you know more about what your opponent is doing, you're able to stop the key card which is also a downside of this card. If your opponent has multiple options they can go into, you might end up negating the wrong thing. Balance of Judgment is a normal trap card with the effect: if your opponent controls more cards than the combined number of cards in your hand and that you control, draw cards equal to their surplus. You can only activate one Balance of Judgment per turn. This card is beneficial depending on how many cards you have. If you happen to have a very few cards, you might have one card on the field and no cards in your hand. This can provide you with quite a net gain. The only concern is that you do have to be in a certain situation where your opponent has drawn into a significant amount, and usually at that point they're at that stage where they might be able to game you if you have no other protection cards. Herald of Pure Light is a light attribute fairy type Xyz monster, rank 2 with 600 attack and 1000 defense. It requires 2 level 2 monsters to summon it, and its effect is you can detach one Xyz material from this card, then target one monster in your graveyard, add it to your hand. Then shuffle one card from your hand into the deck. You can only use the effect of Herald of Pure Light once per turn. The benefit of this card is by detaching material, you're then able to recover one of your graveyard cards, and it goes straight to the hand so you can reuse it. It does come at the cost of having to shuffle something else you've got from your hand back into the deck, but if you've got some weak cards or ones that just don't work for the time being, it's not really that much of a cost. Essentially, you're just trading one card for another and a detach. And the final reprint is Celestial Nightlord Parshaft. This is a light attribute fairy type link monster. Link arrows are bottom left, bottom and bottom right, with 2,400 attack points and a link rating of 3. It requires 2+ fairy type monsters to summon it, and the effect: you can discard one card, add one The Sanctuary in the Sky, or one card that specifically lists The Sanctuary in the Sky in its text from your deck to your hand. Or if The Sanctuary in the Sky is on the field, you can add one fairy type monster instead. If another fairy type monster you control is sent to the graveyard, except during the damage step, you can banish one fairy type monster from your graveyard. Special summon one fairy monster from your hand whose levels are higher than that banished monster's. You can only use each effect Celestial Nightlord Parshaft once per turn. So overall, this card is able to not only search out for the Sanctuary in the Sky, which is one of the key cards within the archetype, it can also list a card that has Sanctuary in the Sky in its text from the deck to the graveyard. So it acts very much like a rotor for the agents and the fairy archetype in general. It also has the ability to banish a fairy type monster when it's dealt with by a response, if any of your other fairy type monsters are sent to the graveyard, in order for you to special summon one fairy monster from your hand who has a higher level than that banished monster. It does have the disadvantage of you needing to have to use several cards to activate this effect. You need the monster that needs to be destroyed, and it has to be face up. You also have to have a monster in your graveyard to banish, trigger off this effect, and you also need to have a high level monster in your hand to be able to special summon. Each of these effects are in general very useful, but my concern is how useful can they be if they are reliant on you having several cards in specific situations. Overall, I think the reprints are quite good. Each of them is usable within the deck and very much required, especially Archlord Christia. I would argue that the weakest one and the least useful one for the time being is probably this Link monster, just because it doesn't synergize with the current support that we've already seen. Whatever you guys think, please leave those in the comments down below. Like the video if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe for more daily Yu-Gi-Oh!